North Carolina lawmakers and school boards want to restrict cell phones in schools. Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Megan Glova. Now, there's a big debate over how to do it, and WRAL found that not all school policies are actually keeping kids off their phones. We're joined now by WRAL Education Insider Emily Walkenhorst to learn a bit more about this. Emily, thanks for being here.
Of course. Glad to be here.
Of course. Yeah, thank you. So you and Destiny Patterson actually went inside several schools for this story to see what's working, what's not. If we can start with what happened at Enloe and Gardner Magnet High in Wake County first, that'd be great.
Yeah, so both of those high schools were actually pretty different. So Enloe High School in Raleigh, they have a policy that is red, yellow, green. So red, can't be on your phone. Yellow, you can only be on it for instructional reasons. Green, you kind of have, it's free time, basically.
Okay. Is that like classroom to classroom?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And the teacher, there's like a chart on the wall with like a hand, like a clock.
Yeah.
And they put the hands on the color, signaling what it is. And some students said it was clearer than others. You kind of just listen to the teacher, what they say.
Okay. What was maybe a student reaction to this? Did they think it works pretty well?
Some of them said, they, didn't think phones were a problem. It's kind of a classic thing. A lot of students say they don't think. Some students, that I talked to outside of Enloe had said, we understand phones are a problem, but a lot of students really don't feel that way. They thought they really didn't notice these charts on the wall. They just kind of know what to do based on what their teacher says. And yeah. So.
Okay. And just for reference, what is Wake County Schools' cell phone policy? Do they leave it up to individual schools or teachers at all?
Yeah, so they have kind of always left it to schools to kind of set their own parameters. And most schools actually have already had cell phone policies in place. So now Wake County has a formal policy. They passed that on Tuesday, saying when cell phones can be used. They can be used for certain instructional times, but they have to be silenced and put away. So the Gardner High School policy ties pretty well to that.
Okay.
Theirs is basically silenced and put away. If we see it out, we'll confiscate it or, give you a warning or confiscate it. The new cell phone policy district-wide requires the warning first. Then, they'll confiscate it. You might have to come after school and get it from the principal. Your parent might have to come get it. It just kind of depends on the situation. And they're a little stricter, and that is supposed to be in every single classroom. And so the rule is supposed to be the same in every classroom. And that's kind of what the school board is really looking for. They're looking for some consistency where, every school kind of does it mostly the same way. Classrooms do it the same way. People just kind of get it.
Gotcha. And I think I read in your story that the policy, at least in Wake County, is changing next month. What is that going to look like?
Yeah, so starting in July, schools are going to have to look at their policies and make sure they actually still are able to implement them. And some of them are a little ahead of the curve, looking at what Gardner started doing last year, which was new for them. They were trying to get ahead of this. Some other high schools, I think in Cary and Holly Springs area, have like pouches that students put phones in. We did talk to a teacher at Gardner who had bought one of those like over-the-door shoe racks.
Oh, okay.
That you could put a phone in. Just kind of a cheaper thing than like a pouch that locks. But she actually stopped using it because she just didn't really feel like she needed to under the new policy. And she actually thought the shoe rack worked just as well as their new policy in Gardner. So they think they'll be able to keep doing what they're doing. Some of these other schools that are, have like these shoe racks or, phone pockets will probably still be able to keep doing what they're doing. But others, a few didn't have a policy. Now they're going to have to. Now they're going to have to say, hey, you can't have your phone out. There will be consequences.
Okay, gotcha. When we come back, we're going to discuss what Emily and Destiny saw in Granville County. Okay, Emily, so what did you and Destiny experience at JF Webb High in Granville County when it came to cell phones?
So they're actually fairly similar to Garner, but a little bit more heavy on the we will immediately confiscate it side. And they specifically want it to go straight. They want administrators to have to deal with it, right? So like if you see it, contact an administrator, we'll come get the phone. And then their parents are going to have to pick it up after school. So it's kind of like Garner, but just a little stricter.
Okay.
And they started doing that this last year. That's when the Granville School Board had passed this policy that basically said at the high school level, you can't have it out at all except for lunch and class transitions. At elementary and middle school, you can't even have it out during those times. So at Webb High, they started doing this last year, and the principal, who is new but has been a principal in other schools, basically said cell phones were a little bit of a problem at first while people were getting used to the new rules, and now it's going pretty smoothly, and it's going a lot smoother than some of his other experiences as a principal.
Gotcha. I was actually really curious about what the confiscation situation was, because I went to high school in Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools, and at least at my high school, it was pretty intense. I think there was a warning period, and then they could keep your phone for 1 school day, and then 3 school days, and then 5 school days. So
that's harsh.
I remember I got mine taken on a Friday one time, and then they got to keep it over the weekend. So I guess what I'm getting to is just when it comes to some of these policies or considerations, is that being taken into account at all? Maybe for the students who are abusing a cell phone policy, what could come of that?
Yeah, there is some consideration, I think, for the utility of cell phones now. I think it was just a little bit different, years ago. Not as many people had a smartphone, or when there wasn't kind of this acceptance in society of how we use them, right? So the way we use them now is just kind of constant communication. But, quite a while ago, they weren't necessarily used in that way. We didn't have the same sort of expectations. We didn't behave in a way where we thought we could change plans last minute or change work schedules last minute. And now we're kind of used to being able to do that, right? So I haven't heard of a confiscation policy that would actually take the phone away for multiple days. I'd be interested in actually checking to see if it's still a policy at your old high school.
And that was, I don't know if that helps or doesn't, that was pre-smartphone time. That was when I had my NV2 for Verizon, I feel like a lot of teenagers did. But no, I'd be curious in that too. I guess while we talk about smartphones, how does kind of inserting smartphones into this conversation make things more difficult? I feel like there are pros to smartphones and maybe some of the access that kids could have when it comes to research on it, but there's obviously some cons that go along with it too. Did you get to talk to students or teachers about their thoughts on implementing them in the classroom?
Yeah, so actually we had talked to some people who made some interesting observations that when smartphones first came out, they were actually seen as a boon to a classroom, right? Because, the first iPhone was in 2007. People didn't really have them in large numbers back then, but it was kind of seen as this laptop. Students, by and large, did not have laptops at their disposal inside the classroom. So at first, teachers were excited, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, oh, now we kind of students have computers at their fingertips. I can have them look up stuff, or I can, I send them a link to an article. They can read it instead of me having to print it out, because printer paper is very scarce in a lot of schools. And so, there was kind of this embracing of it. But the tide has really turned on that, because we now see phones as being kind of distractive from more productive activities. So there's an academic use, but at the same time, I think they've kind of realized that things are a little different now, and actually more schools have laptops for students now.
That's true. I'm not sure how we might be able to measure this beyond just opinion. Maybe what you found worked best for both teachers to enforce and students to adhere to, but which policy between Enloe, Gardner, and JF Webb seemed to make everyone happy overall, I suppose? Did any stand out to you that seemed to work the best in students' and teachers' eyes?
So at Enloe, I'm not sure that everyone was really happy with it. We had talked to a teacher who had helped develop the policy, and he was like, I really think we could probably benefit from some more consistency classroom to classroom. It's kind of hard to reach a consensus on that, though. And then, in talking to people at Webb and Garner, there seemed to be a little bit more, we heard mostly positive things from them. So some of the students they thought they should be able to use their phones in class once they got their work done, and they were sad they were not able to. So not everybody was completely thrilled, but there seemed to be a, better understanding of, okay, I just can't use this phone unless it's for a lesson, or we're making videos for a project or something like that. So it seems that those were a little better, and I had talked to some other students at other schools, and they said, well, a policy like what Granville has really seems like it could work because it sounds very consistent. And it's the administration's problem and not the teacher's problem.
Gotcha. So finally, I was hoping you could tell us a bit about possible bills restricting student cell phone use.
Yeah, so there are two bills in the state legislature. There's a House bill and there's a Senate bill, and they're both pretty different. So the Senate bill, talks about basically any kind of device. It encompasses more than just cell phones. It says you basically can't use them unless for instructional purposes. There's some carve-outs for an emergency or, a student with a disability. And that's a big thing to remember. There might be some kids who have like a 504 plan that's under federal law. Maybe they have type 1 diabetes and they need to be able to check their blood sugar. A lot of those things are integrated into apps you might have on your phone. So there are carve-outs for things like that in this Senate bill. The Senate is really trying to push their version of it. The House is really focused on just cell phones, and it's a much shorter bill. It doesn't really get into, exemptions for emergencies. There are some carve-outs in it, but not for emergencies. And, they're really trying to push their version of the bill, too. So it seems like there's a consensus on we need to do something, but not a consensus on how. And the way those bills would work is they would require school boards to pass policies to essentially implement what's in the bill. So, Wake County really passed their policy keeping in mind, what could happen at the state legislature, trying to account for what they thought, the final law could be. But we really still don't know. And so there could be adjustments that need to be made, just kind of depending on what the final law ends up being.
Okay. Did Wake County kind of make that choice because it's just so it wouldn't be as significant of a shift, I suppose, if once a bill possibly was approved? Is that kind of their reasoning behind that?
Yeah, I think they didn't really want to do something and then have to pull it back in a big way and have it be confusing. And they also didn't want to necessarily make a dramatic change either because they knew that some of their schools liked their policies and that their policies were a little different. So they wanted to still keep some flexibility for schools too. So they weren't trying to do anything dramatic, but they were still trying to make a difference in cracking down on phones.
All right. Well, anything else interesting you guys came across? Any surprises that happened at these schools or just overall takeaways?
Yeah, so I mean, it was great to get into these schools. It's something that, we don't always get to do a lot of talking to these students. We did see a little bit of cell phone use at some of the high schools. But generally, there seemed to be just kind of this collective understanding from teachers, administrators, and even students that this is going to happen. And, there is going to be a crackdown. We're going to have to agree on something. We kind of heard before that some students will fight back if a teacher tries to take it away. I've been hearing that for years from teachers getting exhausted. they not wanting to confiscate phones, not wanting to fight students. But now with kind of this conversation we're having and all of these movements by policymakers, there seems to be, everybody seems to know that something is going to happen. And I kind of wonder if that's going to make enforcing the policies easier.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, super interesting topic. Thanks to Emily for being here, and good job to you and Destiny for this overall story.
All right,
appreciate it. And thank you so much for listening to the WRAL Daily Download. You might be listening to this podcast on WRAL.com or the WRAL News app. You can also find it on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Follow the show so you don't miss an episode. I'm Megan Glova. Thanks for listening.